When a dying woman collapsed in the dust of the Wyoming frontier, seasoned trail boss Colt Maddox faced an impossible choice: leave her behind and survive, or stop and risk everything. What happened next would challenge everything the unforgiving West stood for, and prove that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is refuse to keep moving. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels across the world. The wind came first. It always did out here, screaming across the flats like something alive and angry, kicking up dust devils that danced and died in the space of a breath. Colt Maddox pulled his hat down tighter and squinted against the grit that found every crack in a man's defenses. 31 years old, and he'd spent half of them on trails like this one. Long, punishing stretches of nothing that separated one town from another, one season from the next. The herd moved like a river of brown and white ahead of him, 200 head of cattle that represented someone else's fortune and his own reputation. Keep them alive, keep them moving, get paid, then do it all over again somewhere else. Simple, clean, no complications. That was before he saw the shape in the road. "Boss?" Riley drew his horse up beside Colt's, pointing ahead. "That luggage or what?" Colt didn't answer right away. His eyes were better than Riley's, always had been. What the younger man saw as abandoned baggage, Colt recognized as something worse: a body. "Could be a trap," Marcus called from behind them, hand already moving toward the rifle strapped to his saddle. "Bandits use decoys. You know that." Colt knew a lot of things. He knew Marcus was right to be suspicious. He knew stopping for anything out here was a risk that could cost time, cattle, money. He knew the smart play was to give it wide berth and keep pushing toward Cheyenne. He also knew that shape in the dirt was breathing. "Hold the herd," Colt's voice cut through the wind. "Riley, Marcus, with me. Rest of you keep those cattle calm." The men exchanged looks but didn't argue. They'd learned not to. Colt dismounted 20 feet from the collapsed figure, approached slow and deliberate. His hand rested on his revolver, not drawn, but ready. Out here, trust got you killed faster than a bullet. It was a woman. That registered first, even before he noticed anything else. A woman, heavy-set and motionless in the dirt, wearing a gray dress that had once been nice but was now torn and filthy. No visible wounds, no blood staining the ground around her, just stillness, and that barely there rise and fall of her chest. "Jesus," Riley breathed. "Is she alive?" Colt knelt beside her, fingers checking her pulse, weak but present. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, skin pale as old paper. When he touched her forehead, the heat nearly burned his palm. Fever, dehydration, maybe worse. Marcus circled wide, eyes scanning the horizon. "Don't see nobody else, no horse, no wagon. How the hell she get out here?" That was the question, wasn't it? Women didn't just appear in the middle of Wyoming wasteland. Someone brought her. Someone left her. Or she ran. "We taking her?" Riley asked, already knowing the answer would complicate everything. Colt looked at the woman's face. Even unconscious, even half dead, there was something in the set of her jaw that suggested she'd fought hard to get this far. Whatever had put her in this dirt, it hadn't been surrender. "Yeah." He slid his arms under her shoulders and knees, grunting at the weight. She was solid, substantial in a way that would make the ride harder and the wagon heavier. "We're taking her." "Boss, we're already 2 days behind schedule," Marcus protested. "Another mouth to feed, and she ain't exactly—" "I didn't ask for a debate." Colt's tone left no room for discussion. "Get the supply wagon. Clear space in the back." Riley moved fast. Marcus lingered a moment, jaw tight with the kind of objection he wouldn't voice but wouldn't forget either. Then he followed. Colt carried her to the wagon himself, each step deliberate against the wind's resistance. She didn't wake, didn't even stir. Just dead weight in his arms, trusting without knowing, dependent without choosing. He hated that already. In the wagon, they made room among the flour sacks and medicine supplies. Colt laid her down as gently as the situation allowed, then grabbed a canteen and wet cloth from the stores. "Should we try to wake her?" Riley hovered nearby, uncertain. "No, let her body decide when it's ready." Colt dripped water between her cracked lips, watching her throat work in an automatic swallow. "Good. Reflex is still functioning. He placed the wet cloth on her forehead, then pulled back. Keep an eye on her. Change the cloth every hour. If she wakes, give her water, small sips only. What if she don't wake? Colt met the younger man's eyes. Then we bury her in Cheyenne and move on. Harsh, maybe, but honest. Out here, sentiment was a luxury they couldn't afford. The crew gathered as Colt returned to his horse, their faces carrying variations of the same question. Only Jake, the oldest hand at 46, spoke it aloud. She gonna slow us down? Everything slows us down, Colt replied, swinging back into the saddle. Weather, river crossings, lame cattle, we adapt. We keep moving. Woman's different than weather. Is she? Colt turned his horse toward the front of the herd. Get those cattle moving. We've wasted enough daylight. The order scattered them back to positions, though he felt their doubt like a weight between his shoulders. They weren't wrong to question. A stranger meant complications. Variables he couldn't control. Risk he couldn't calculate. But something about leaving her had felt wrong in a way Colt couldn't name, and he'd learned to trust his gut more than his logic. The herd moved forward. The wagon creaked along behind. And in the back, wrapped in blankets that smelled like horse and leather, the woman slept through it all. Night came fast. They made camp in a shallow valley that offered some protection from the wind. Colt posted sentries and checked the herd before finally allowing himself to approach the wagon where the woman still lay unconscious. Riley sat beside her, faithful to the task. No change, boss. Still breathing, still fevered. Tried the water every hour, like you said. She swallows it down, but don't wake. Colt nodded. Get some food. I'll take watch. When Riley left, Colt settled onto the wagon bed, back against the wooden side, studying their unexpected passenger in the firelight that filtered through canvas. She wasn't young, 30, maybe. Possibly older, hard to tell through the damage. Her hands, when he examined them, showed calluses that spoke of work. Rough palms, broken nails. These weren't the hands of someone who'd lived soft, but her dress, even filthy and torn, had quality to it. The stitching was precise. The fabric, though ruined, had been expensive once. Contradiction, mystery. Colt didn't like mysteries. Who are you? He asked the unconscious woman. And what the hell were you running from? No answer. Just the rattle of her breath and the distant sounds of camp, men talking low, horses shifting, the eternal wind. He should sleep, should grab the 4 hours he allowed himself and trust the rotation to handle the night. But something kept him there, watching her breathe, waiting for her eyes to open. Around midnight, she stirred. It started small, fingers twitching, eyelids fluttering. Then her breathing changed, quickened. Her head turned side to side, caught in some dream or memory Colt couldn't see. Easy. He reached for the water canteen. You're safe. Her eyes snapped open, wild, terrified, searching for threat in every shadow. Colt didn't move closer, didn't crowd her. You're in a cattle drive wagon, heading toward Cheyenne. Found you collapsed on the trail. You've been unconscious about 10 hours. She tried to sit up, failed, fell back with a gasp that sounded like pain. Don't. Colt held up the canteen. You're dehydrated, fevered. Whatever you were before you hit that dirt, right now you're weak as a newborn. So lie still and drink water before you pass out again. For a long moment, she just stared at him, evaluating, calculating odds he could see working behind her eyes. Smart then, even half dead, she was thinking. Why? Her voice came out like gravel, barely above a whisper. Why didn't you leave me? Colt considered the question, considered lying or offering some noble reason that would make him sound better than he was. Didn't seem right, he said instead. Truth, stripped bare. She studied his face like she was reading a contract, looking for the clause that would cost her. What do you want? For you to drink water and not die in my wagon. Colt held the canteen closer. Everything else we'll figure out later. Her hand trembled when she reached for it. He saw her notice the shake, saw frustration flash across her features before she controlled it. Pride, even now. Even like this. She drank. Small sips that became deeper pulls as her body remembered what it needed. Slow, Colt warned. Too much too fast and you'll just bring it back up. She lowered the canteen, water dripping down her chin. How long to Cheyenne? 4 days, maybe 5. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. That seemed to confuse her more than anything else. She handed back the canteen, movements careful like someone trying not to show how much everything hurt. I'm Colt Maddox, trail boss for this outfit. You got a name? Another pause. Another calculation. Lena, she said finally. Lena Voss. Where'd you come from, Lena Voss? Her jaw tightened. Doesn't matter. It might, if someone's looking for you, if you're running from trouble that could catch up to us. No one's looking. The certainty in her voice felt like its own story. Not anymore. Colt let it sit, didn't push. Plenty of people came west running from something. Hell, that's what made the frontier, fresh starts and burned bridges. You work? He asked instead. The question surprised her. What? Can you work? Cook, clean, mend, keep accounts, anything useful? Lena's eyes narrowed. I can do numbers, ledgers, inventory, accounts. I'm good at it. How good? Better than anyone you've got. Bold claim from a woman who couldn't sit up on her own. Colt almost smiled. That's so? I kept books for a trading company for 6 years, never missed a penny, never made an error they could prove. She met his gaze head on, fever-bright eyes defiant. You want me to earn my keep? Give me your records. I'll show you what you're missing. Interesting. Most people in her position would beg, promise anything, play weak to gain sympathy. Lena Voss offered skill instead. Records are a mess, Colt admitted. Riley tries, but numbers aren't his strength. We've lost count of supplies twice already this drive. Then you're bleeding money you don't even know about. Probably. Colt stood, decision made. Get some rest. Tomorrow, if you can sit up without falling over, I'll bring you the ledgers. You prove yourself useful, you earn your passage. We clear? Lena nodded slowly. Clear. Good. He turned to leave, then paused. Lena, whatever you're running from, it stays in the past. My crew doesn't need to know your story, and I don't care to hear it. But if trouble shows up, you tell me before it becomes my problem. Understood? Understood. He left her there, climbing down from the wagon into the cold night air. Jake was waiting by the fire, coffee cup in hand, questions on his face. She wake? Yeah. She trouble? Colt poured himself coffee, letting the heat burn his palms through the tin cup. Aren't they all? Jake snorted. Fair point. What's the play? She says she can handle ledgers. Figure we'll find out if she's lying. And if she ain't, then maybe we stop losing money to bad counting. Colt sipped the bitter coffee. Either way, she's with us to Cheyenne. After that, she's her own problem. You know Marcus ain't happy. Neither's half the crew. Marcus is never happy. That's what makes him good at watching for threats. Colt met his old friend's eyes. We've carried worse cargo. She can't cause more trouble than that bull that broke loose outside Fort Laramie. Jake laughed at the memory, tension breaking. True enough, that bastard destroyed half the camp. They stood together in comfortable silence, two men who'd ridden enough trails together that words weren't always necessary. Finally, Jake spoke again, voice lower. She remind you of anyone? Colt stiffened slightly. No. Liar. Jake didn't push it further, just tossed out the dregs of his coffee. Get some sleep, boss. I got first watch. Colt knew he should. Knew tomorrow would be long and the day after longer. But sleep felt far away, replaced by the memory of fever-bright eyes and a voice asking, Why didn't you leave me? Good question. He still didn't have a good answer. Dawn came painted in shades of pink and gold that made the prairie look almost beautiful. Almost. Colt was checking the herd when Riley found him, looking nervous. Boss, the woman, Lena, she's trying to get up. Thought you should know. Colt bit back irritation. She's strong enough. Don't think so, but she's stubborn as hell. That tracked. Colt handed off his count to Marcus and headed for the wagon. He found Lena sitting upright, legs dangling off the wagon bed, breathing hard like the effort had cost everything. Her face was still too pale, sweat beading on her forehead, but her eyes were clearer than last night. Thought I told you to rest. You told me to prove I could sit up without falling over. Lena wiped her forehead with a shaking hand. I'm sitting. Barely. It counts. Despite himself, Colt felt a flicker of respect. Stubborn and stupid, but at least consistent. You eat? Riley brought cornmeal mush. I kept it down. Good. Colt grabbed the leather satchel that held their accounting mess and dropped it beside her. Here, show me what you got. Lena pulled out the first ledger with hands that still trembled, spreading it across her lap. Colt watched her face as she scanned the pages, saw recognition, then confusion, then something that looked like physical pain. This is... She flipped pages faster. Who's been keeping these records? Riley. Why? Because he's losing you money on every transaction. Lena pointed to an entry. See this? Purchase of 50 pounds of flour in Fort Collins. But here, she flipped forward 3 pages. Your distribution log shows 70 pounds used. That's 20 pounds you either didn't record buying or someone's stealing. Colt leaned closer. Could be a mistake. Could be, but it's not the only one. She pulled out a second ledger, comparing entries with a speed that suggested she really did know what she was doing. Your cattle count's off by at least 5 head. Your medicine supplies don't match your expense logs. And someone's been skimming small amounts from the supply budget. Nothing big enough to notice right away, but over time it adds up to significant loss. You got all that from 10 minutes of looking? I'm good at patterns. Numbers tell stories if you know how to listen. Lena looked up at him, eyes sharp despite her weakened state. You want me to fix this or not? Colt straightened, mind already working through implications. If she was right, and his gut said she was, someone on the crew had been stealing. Small amounts, easy to miss, harder to prove. Fix it, he said. But Lena, when you find who's skimming, you come to me first. Don't confront them. Don't tell anyone else. Just me. Clear? She nodded, understanding immediately. You think they'd hurt me to keep quiet? I think people do stupid things when they're cornered. Colt pulled his revolver, checked the load, then set it on the wagon bed within her reach. Probably won't need it, but if something happens before I get back, you know how to use one of these? Lena stared at the gun like it was a snake. I've never... Point and pull the trigger. It's loaded. Safety's on. He showed her the mechanism. Don't touch it unless you have to, but if you have to, don't hesitate. He left her there, surrounded by ledgers and guarded by a weapon she clearly didn't want, and headed back to the herd with a problem he hadn't expected. A thief among the crew changed things, made everyone suspect, made trust, already thin, even thinner. Jake found him an hour later. Riley says the woman's asking for more ledgers. What's she doing? Finding problems. Colt kept his eyes on the cattle, watching for the tells that meant trouble. How well do you know the men? Well enough. Why? Someone's been stealing from the supplies, small amounts over time. Jake swore softly. You sure? Lena's sure. And the numbers back her up. Could be her lying, stirring trouble to make herself valuable. Could be. Colt had considered that. But the ledgers don't lie, and she's got no reason to fabricate problems this specific. Someone's skimming. Question is who? Want me to ask around, quiet-like? No, let her finish the accounting first. Get the full picture before we start pointing fingers. Colt finally looked at his old friend. But keep your eyes open. Watch who gets nervous when she's working those books. Jake nodded slowly. This what you signed up for? Babysitting a sick woman and hunting thieves? No, I signed up for moving cattle and getting paid. Colt pulled his hat lower against the climbing sun. But that was yesterday. Today we deal with what we got. 3 days passed. Lena worked through the ledgers with single-minded focus, growing stronger each day. By the second afternoon, she was walking, slowly, with Riley's help, but walking. By the third, she was sitting by the fire at night, double-checking counts while the men played cards and told lies. The crew adjusted to her presence the way they'd adjust to new weather, cautiously at first, then with grudging acceptance. She didn't talk much, didn't ask for special treatment, just worked the numbers and kept quiet. But Colt noticed things. He noticed how Tommy, the youngest hand, started avoiding her, how his eyes would skitter away when she looked his direction, how he volunteered for every task that took him far from camp when she was working. He noticed how Lena noticed too, tracking Tommy's movements with the same attention she gave the ledgers. On the fourth night, she came to Colt while he was checking the perimeter. "It's Tommy," she said without preamble. "He's your thief." Colt had suspected. Having it confirmed didn't make it easier. "You sure?" "The pattern's clear, small amounts missing after every town stop, and Tommy's always the one who handles supply runs. He's been careful, never too much at once, different categories each time. But it's him." She handed Colt a page of calculations. "Here, I've documented everything." The evidence was damning, clean, precise, impossible to argue with. How much total? Over the last 6 months? Close to $300. Colt felt anger rise, cold and controlled. $300 wasn't huge money, but it was enough. Enough to matter, enough to break trust. "What do you want me to do?" Lena asked quietly. "Nothing. This is my problem now." Colt folded the paper carefully. "You did good work, Lena. Whatever happens next, that's on me." She studied his face in the darkness. "You're going to fire him. Worse, I'm going to make him face what he did." Colt met her eyes. "Out here, a man's word is all he's got. Tommy broke that. He needs to own it in front of everyone, or he'll do it again somewhere else. And if he runs, then he runs, and everyone knows why. Either way, he don't ride with us anymore." Lena nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know you trusted him." "I trusted all of them." Colt turned back toward camp. "That was my mistake." He called the meeting an hour later, gathering the crew around the main fire. Tommy came last, eyes already nervous, body language screaming guilt to anyone who knew how to read it. Colt didn't drag it out, didn't make a speech. "Tommy's been stealing from the supply budget," he said flatly. "Small amounts over 6 months. Adds up to about $300. Evidence is here." He held up Lena's accounting. "Anyone wants to see it." The silence was immediate and complete. Tommy's face went white, then red. You can't prove." "I can. And I am." Colt's voice stayed level. "You got anything to say? Any explanation that makes this right?" For a moment, Tommy looked like he might fight, might deny, might run. Then his shoulders sagged. "I needed money," he said quietly. "My sister back in Missouri, she's got medical bills. I thought just a little, just enough to help her, and I'd pay it back once we got paid in Cheyenne. I swear I was going to pay it back." "You swear a lot of things, Tommy. Swore you'd be honest when I hired you. Swore you'd work hard and keep trust. How's those oaths looking now?" Tommy's eyes dropped. "I'm sorry. I know you are. Sorry you got caught." Colt pulled out a small leather bag, counted out bills. "Here's what you're owed for work already done. Take your horse and ride out. Tonight." "Colt, please. Tonight, Tommy. Or I turn you over to the law in Cheyenne and you explain it to them instead." Colt's tone left no room for negotiation. "Your choice." Tommy took the money with shaking hands, looked around at faces that had been friendly just hours ago and were now closed, cold, judging. "I really am sorry," he said again. Nobody answered. He was gone within the hour, swallowed by darkness and distance. The crew sat in heavy silence after, processing betrayal in their own ways. Finally, Marcus spoke. "The woman." He jerked his chin toward where Lena sat apart, giving them space. "She find all that?" "She did." "Huh." Marcus stared into the fire. "Guess she earned her keep after all." "More than." Colt stood, brushing dust from his pants. "Anyone else got questions?" No one did. They dispersed slowly, returning to their routines but carrying new awareness. Trust, once broken, didn't heal clean. Colt found Lena by the wagon, organizing the ledgers into neat stacks. "He's gone," he said. She nodded without looking up. "I heard." "You did the right thing, finding that, I mean. The crew needed to know." "Did I?" Lena finally met his eyes. "Or did I just make a scared kid homeless because I'm good with numbers?" "You found theft. What happened after? That's on him, not you." Colt sat on the wagon step, suddenly tired. Don't take responsibility for his choices, Lena. He made them long before you showed up. Easy to say. Yeah, doesn't make it less true. They sat quiet for a while, listening to the night sounds. Cattle lowing, wind in the grass, men settling into sleep. Thank you, Lena said finally, for believing me. For not, she trailed off. Not what? Not leaving me behind when this got complicated. Colt thought about that. About how many times in the last few days he could have made her someone else's problem. About how she'd given him every excuse to. You made yourself valuable, he said, instead of all the other things he could have said. That's what matters out here. Pull your weight, solve problems, don't create more trouble than you fix. Do that, and you've got a place. Is that what you do? Pull your weight? Every day. Colt stood, preparing to make his rounds. Get some rest, Lena. Tomorrow we hit the crossing at Crow Creek. It'll be rough. Colt? He paused. Why didn't you really leave me in that dirt? The question again. The one he'd been avoiding honestly answering because he didn't fully understand it himself. Because leaving you felt wrong, he said finally. Raw truth, unpolished. And I've done enough wrong things in my life to recognize the feeling. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the darkness between wagons. Behind him, Lena Voss sat surrounded by ledgers and possibilities, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something strange. Safe. It wouldn't last, she knew that. Safety never did. But for this moment, in this place, she let herself believe it might. And somewhere in the Wyoming darkness, Colt Maddox made his rounds and wondered what the hell he'd started by choosing to stop instead of moving on. The cattle drive pushed toward Cheyenne, unaware that the hardest tests were still ahead. That stopping for one collapsed woman would set in motion events none of them could predict. That sometimes the strongest choice isn't the one that makes sense. It's the one that makes you human. Crow Creek looked deceptively calm when they reached it the next afternoon. Water moved slow and dark between muddy banks, reflecting clouds that promised rain before nightfall. Colt sat his horse at the edge, reading the current the way some men read books. Deeper than it looks, Jake said beside him. See how the surface don't match the bank color? Means the bottom's churned up, fast water underneath. Can we ford it? Cattle can. Wagon's gonna be rough, though. Jake spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Your call, boss. Colt turned in his saddle, looking back at the supply wagon where Lena sat wrapped in a blanket despite the afternoon heat. She'd been strong enough to walk this morning, even helped Riley reorganize the remaining supplies after Tommy's departure. But the fever still came and went. Another day of rest would be better. They didn't have another day. We cross, he decided. Marcus, you and Riley get the cattle moving. Keep them tight together. They panic and spread out. We'll lose half of them downstream. Jake, you drive the supply wagon. I'll ride point and find the shallowest route. What about her? Marcus jerked his chin toward Lena. She stays in the wagon, safest place during a crossing. Colt caught Marcus's expression. Something else you want to say? Just thinking it's a lot of risk for one person. We lose that wagon. We lose supplies we can't replace before Cheyenne. Then don't lose the wagon. Colt's tone ended the discussion. He rode into the water first, feeling the current pull at his horse's legs, cold enough to bite even through leather boots. The horse didn't like it, tossing his head nervously, but Colt kept him steady. 20 feet out, the bottom dropped away and water rose to his stirrups. 40 feet, it reached his knees. Not good, but manageable. He guided his horse across at an angle, letting the current carry them slightly downstream rather than fighting it head-on. The far bank came up gradually. No drop-offs, no hidden sinkholes that would trap wagon wheels. It would work. Barely. Back on the near side, he gave orders quickly. Riley, start pushing the herd. Keep them angled upstream like I showed. Marcus, watch the flanks. Any cattle try to turn back, you turn them harder forward. Jake, I know how to drive a wagon through water, Jake interrupted. Done it before, I'll do it again. Not with a passenger, you haven't. Jake's weathered face creased into something almost like a smile. That what she is? A passenger? Today she is. Colt looked toward the wagon where Lena watched their preparations with sharp attention. Get her across safe, Jake. Everything else can be replaced. Even you? Especially me. The cattle went first. 200 head of nervous beef driven into water they didn't trust, by men who understood fear was contagious. Riley worked the point position, his horse dancing sideways as cattle balked and turned. Marcus rode the left flank, keeping stragglers from breaking away downstream. It was controlled chaos, the kind Colt had seen 100 times. Cattle bawling, water splashing, men shouting over the noise. He rode through the middle of it, correcting course, pushing forward, always forward. Most made it across fine. 3 tried to turn back and had to be forced forward with rope and pressure. One got swept 20 yards downstream before finding footing on a sandbar and scrambling out wild-eyed and heaving. But they made it. The wagon was next. Colt positioned himself at the water's edge, watching Jake drive the heavy supply wagon down the bank. The wheels hit water and immediately the current grabbed them, pushing sideways. "Left!" Colt shouted. "Angle left!" Jake hauled on the reins, muscles straining. The horses pulling the wagon didn't like the water any better than the cattle had, but they were trained for this. They leaned into the harness, hooves churning mud and water. 10 feet in, the wagon lurched. Hard. Colt's heart stopped as the whole thing tilted right, wheels lifting off the bottom for a breathless second. Through the canvas cover he heard a crash, supplies shifting, something breaking. Then Lena's voice, steady and clear. "Keep going! Don't stop!" The wagon righted itself with a bone-jarring thud. Jake didn't hesitate, driving the horses harder, forcing them through water that tried to push them sideways, downstream, anywhere but forward. Colt rode alongside, ready to grab the harness if needed, ready to do something even if he didn't know what. The water reached the wagon bed, seeping through boards, soaking supplies they couldn't afford to lose. Halfway across, one of the horses stumbled. The wagon stopped dead, current pushing against it like a living thing. Jake cursed, whipping the reins, but the horse had gone down on its knees, struggling in the soft bottom. "Get up!" Jake roared. "Get up, you worthless—" Colt was already moving, urging his horse close to the downed animal. He grabbed its bridle, pulling up hard, adding his horse's strength to the equation. "Come on!" he growled through gritted teeth. "Up! Now!" The horse found something solid beneath its hooves and surged upward, nearly taking Colt with it. The wagon lurched forward again, wheels grinding, wood groaning under the strain. And then they were through, wagon wheels hitting solid ground on the far bank with a sound like salvation. Jake drove another 20 feet before stopping, letting the horses blow and shake water from their manes. Colt rode up beside him, both men breathing hard. "That was close," Jake said. "Too close." Colt dismounted, heading for the back of the wagon. "Lena, you all right?" The canvas parted and Lena emerged, soaked from water that had seeped through the boards. Her hair hung in wet tangles, her dress clung heavy with moisture, but her eyes were bright with something that looked like exhilaration. "That was incredible," she said. Colt stared at her. Incredible. Terrifying, but incredible. She climbed down from the wagon, movements still careful but stronger than days before. Everything was moving and tilting, and I thought we were going to capsize, but we didn't, and... She stopped, seeming to realize she was babbling. "Sorry, I'm fine, just... that was something." Despite everything, Colt felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Most people would be crying or complaining or demanding why they'd risked such a crossing. Lena Voss looked like she'd just discovered something new about herself. "Get changed into dry clothes," he said. "We've still got hours before we can make camp." "I only have one dress." "Then wring that one out and wear it damp. You catch worse fever, you're no use to anyone." Her expression shifted, humor fading into something more complicated. "Right. Useful. That's what matters." She turned back to the wagon before he could respond, leaving Colt standing in wet boots wondering what he'd said wrong. Jake handed him his horse's reins. "You got a gift for words, boss." "Shut up. Just saying, woman survives a river crossing in a wagon that nearly tipped. She's probably not looking for a reminder about her utility value." "Since when do you know what women want?" "Since never. But I know what they don't want, and that's being treated like inventory." Jake climbed back onto the wagon seat. "Think about it." He drove off before Colt could argue, leaving him alone with wet clothes and uncomfortable thoughts. The rest of the crew had already started moving the herd forward, following the trail that would take them to higher ground before nightfall. Colt swung back into his saddle and followed, pushing the creek crossing out of his mind. There was always another problem ahead. Always another decision waiting. No time to worry about whether he'd hurt someone's feelings by being practical. That's what he told himself anyway. They made camp on a rise that gave good visibility in all directions. The cattle settled into grazing, tired from the crossing. Men built fires and set about drying gear, checking supplies for water damage. Colt was inspecting a crate of ammunition that had gotten soaked when Riley approached, looking uncomfortable. "Boss, Lena says she needs to talk to you about the supplies." "More theft?" "Didn't say, just said it was important." Colt found her sitting on a barrel near the supply wagon, wrapped in a blanket, hair still damp, but her color better than it had been in days. She'd organized the water-damaged supplies into neat piles, salvageable, questionable, ruined. "We lose much?" he asked. "Depends on your definition of much." Lena gestured to the ruined pile. 50 pounds of flour, ruined. The cornmeal is questionable, might be edible, might make everyone sick. Coffee stayed mostly dry. Sugar's a loss. She paused. And all the medicine is gone. Bottles broke in the crossing. Colt felt that news like a punch. Medicine was expensive, necessary, irreplaceable out here. All of it? Every bottle. I tried to save what I could, but the glass shattered and everything mixed together. It's useless now. He ran calculations in his head, days to Cheyenne, likelihood of someone getting sick or injured, cost of replacing the medicine versus going without. None of the numbers came out good. "How much will it cost to replace in Cheyenne, Masset?" he asked. Lena pulled out a small notebook. She'd started carrying one, keeping running tallies of everything. Based on typical frontier prices? Probably $120. Maybe more if they know you're desperate. Zeke, money they didn't have to spare. Money that would eat into already thin profits. "We could cut rations," Lena suggested. "Make the food stretch further, save some budget for medicine." Men working this hard need full rations. Cut their food, you cut their strength. Colt paced, thinking. What if we skip some of the planned supply stops? Buy only essentials until we get paid in Cheyenne? That works if nothing goes wrong, if nobody gets sick, if we don't lose more supplies, if the cattle stay healthy. She met his eyes. But that's a lot of ifs, Colt. It was the first time she'd used his name without the formal distance. He noticed, but didn't comment. "We don't have a lot of choices," he said. "We make do with what we got and hope luck holds. And if it doesn't, then we deal with that when it happens." He looked at her organized piles, her careful notes. "You did good work here, Lena. Knowing what we lost is better than guessing." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I'm sorry about the medicine. If I'd secured the crates better." "You didn't drive the wagon into the creek. You didn't make that horse stumble. Some things just happen." He surprised himself by reaching out, touching her shoulder briefly. "Stop taking blame for things that aren't your fault." "Is that what you do?" The question hit closer than she probably meant. "No, I take blame for everything, but I'm trying to learn better." Marcus interrupted before Lena could respond, striding over with his rifle in hand and trouble written across his face. "We got riders coming, 2 of them from the east." Colt's hand went automatically to his revolver. "How far?" "Mile, maybe less. Moving slow like they're not trying to hide." "Could be traders, could be drifters." Colt looked at Lena. "Get in the wagon. Stay there until I say different." For once, she didn't argue. Just gathered her blanket and notebook and disappeared into the wagon without question. Smart woman. The riders appeared 10 minutes later, silhouetted against the setting sun. Colt watched them approach with Jake and Marcus flanking him, Riley positioned with the cattle in case this turned into a diversion for rustling. 2 men, both weathered and trail-worn. The older one rode a good horse, too good for a drifter. The younger one had a rifle across his saddle, casual but ready. They stopped 20 feet from camp. "Evening," the older man said. He had the kind of voice that carried authority even when being friendly. "Saw your fire, hoping you might spare some coffee and conversation." "Coffee we got," Colt replied. "Conversation depends on what you want to talk about." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Fair enough. Name's Owen Briggs. This here's my associate, Mr. Reeves. We're tracking someone. A woman. Heavy set, dark hair, probably traveling alone or in rough shape. Goes by Lena Voss. Colt's expression didn't change. Why are you looking for her? Family matter. Her uncle's concerned. She left his care without word, and he wants to make sure she's safe. Briggs shifted in his saddle. You seen anyone matching that description? Lots of women in Wyoming. Can't say I keep track of all of them. This one's particular. Left Virginia City 2 weeks back. Trail goes cold around here. Briggs's eyes scanned the camp, taking in details. You're sure you haven't seen her? In the wagon, Lena would be listening to every word. Colt wondered if she was scared, angry, or something else entirely. Like I said, we mind our business out here. You want coffee? You're welcome to it. You want to search my camp without cause? We're going to have problems. Reeves's hand moved toward his rifle. Jake's rifle was already pointed at him. I wouldn't. The tension stretched out, both sides weighing odds, calculating risk. Finally, Briggs raised a hand, stopping Reeves. No need for trouble. We're just trying to help a confused woman who don't know what's good for her. He pulled a piece of paper from his coat. Her uncle's offering a reward, $200 for information leading to her return. You happen to see her, you can find us in Cheyenne at the Grand Hotel. He dropped the paper on the ground between them, then turned his horse. Enjoy your evening, gentlemen. And if you do see Miss Voss, you tell her Uncle Gideon's real worried about her. Real worried. They rode off into the gathering darkness, disappearing as smoothly as they'd arrived. Nobody moved until they were well gone. That was interesting, Marcus said finally. That was a threat. Jake lowered his rifle. $200 is a lot of money. Some folks might be tempted. Colt picked up the paper Briggs had dropped. A description of Lena, accurate enough to be concerning, and at the bottom a signature, Gideon Hale. He walked to the wagon and pulled back the canvas. Lena sat in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, face pale in the dim light. When she saw him, something like relief flickered across her features. You didn't give me up, she said quietly. No. Why not? $200 is more than you'd make on this whole drive. Colt climbed into the wagon, sitting across from her with the description in his hand. You want to tell me about Uncle Gideon? Lena's jaw tightened. Not particularly. He sent men after you before? Never had to. I never ran before. Why'd you run now? For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then she took a breath and started talking, words coming slowly at first, then faster. Gideon's not really my uncle. He's my mother's cousin, but he took me in when she died. I was 16, didn't have anywhere else to go. She pulled the blanket tighter. He ran a trading company in Virginia City, needed someone to keep his books. I was good at it, so I stayed. Sounds reasonable so far. It was, for a while. Lena's voice went flat. Then I realized the books didn't just track legitimate trading. Gideon was running stolen goods through his company, using my accounting to make it look clean. I was helping him without knowing it. You confront him? I tried. He explained how things worked, how everyone did it, how I should be grateful for a roof over my head and stop asking questions. She met Colt's eyes. He also made it clear what would happen if I told anyone. I'd be the one facing charges. My name on the books, my signature on the documents. Colt understood immediately. He set you up as the fall if anything went wrong. Exactly. And when I said I wanted to leave, wanted to start over somewhere clean, he told me I couldn't, said I was too... She gestured at herself. Too much like this to survive alone. Said no one would hire me, no one would trust me. Said I needed him. So you ran. So I collapsed in the dirt halfway to Cheyenne, hoping I'd make it far enough that he wouldn't bother chasing. She laughed, bitter and tired. Guess I didn't get far enough. Colt studied the wanted poster, because that's what it was, really, dressed up as a concerned family notice. $200 for a woman who knew too much and tried to escape. These men, he said, Briggs and Reeves, they work for Gideon? Probably. He has a lot of men who do things for him, things he doesn't want connected to his name. They gonna be trouble? If they figure out I'm here? Yes. Lena's voice dropped. Colt, I don't want to bring this down on you, on your crew. Maybe I should just what? Walk out into the wilderness alone? Turn yourself over to men you don't trust? He shook his head. That's not happening. But listen to me. Colt leaned forward, making sure she heard every word. I don't give a damn about Gideon Hale or his $200. You're part of this crew now. You work, you pull your weight, you've earned your place, and I don't hand my people over to anyone for any reason. Clear? Lena's eyes went bright with something that looked dangerously close to tears. Why are you doing this? Because it's right. Because you deserve better than being someone's scapegoat. Because... He stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. Just because. She nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're not in Cheyenne, and those men aren't going to give up easy. He stood, preparing to leave. Tomorrow you stay close to camp. Don't wander off. Don't go anywhere alone. If you see those riders again, you hide and you stay hidden. Understood? Understood. Colt climbed out of the wagon and found Marcus waiting. We keeping her? We're keeping her. Even with bounty hunters looking? Especially with bounty hunters looking. Colt checked his revolver automatically. Double the watch tonight. Anyone approaches camp, I want to know about it before they get within rifle range. You think they'll try something? I think $200 makes people stupid, and I'd rather be ready than sorry. Marcus nodded and moved off to organize the watch rotation. Jake appeared from the darkness, coffee cup in hand. You're making this complicated. I know. Could still hand her over. Say we just found her, take the money and move on. Colt looked at his oldest friend. You think I should? Nope, but I wanted to hear you say it wasn't an option. It's not an option. Good. Jake sipped his coffee. Been wondering if you still had that stubborn streak in you. Nice to know it's still there. This isn't about stubborn. This is about a woman who reminds you of someone you couldn't save before. Jake's voice was gentle but unflinching. I know you, Colt. I know what you're thinking even when you won't say it out loud. Colt wanted to argue, wanted to deny, but Jake had known him too long, seen too much. This is different, he said finally. Is it? She's alive. She's here. I can actually do something this time. Jake set down his coffee, his weathered face serious. Just make sure you're helping her because it's right, not because you're trying to fix something that can't be fixed. He walked away before Colt could respond, leaving him alone with memories he'd spent years trying to forget. A woman in Abilene, 3 years back. Sick, desperate, begging for help that came too late. He'd been too slow, too cautious, too worried about complications. By the time he'd decided to act, she was gone. Different woman, different circumstances. But the same choice, help or walk away. He'd walked away once, lived with that decision every day since. Not this time. Colt spent the rest of the evening checking perimeter, talking with the crew, making sure everyone understood the stakes. $200 was tempting money for men who worked hard for small wages. He needed to know who he could trust. Most of them, it turned out. Riley was offended at the suggestion he'd sell out someone under their protection. Marcus just shrugged and said money wasn't worth the reputation damage. The others fell somewhere in between, loyal enough when it mattered, practical enough to understand why loyalty mattered. Near midnight, Colt made one final round and found Lena sitting by the dying fire, wrapped in her blanket, staring at flames that barely held against the wind. Should be sleeping, he said. Can't. Keep thinking about tomorrow. About what happens if Briggs comes back. Colt sat down across from her. If he comes back, we handle it. How? You can't fight everyone Gideon sends. He has money, resources, men who don't care about right or wrong. Neither do I, when it comes down to it. That surprised her. You don't care about right and wrong? I care. But I also know the world doesn't run on what's right. It runs on what you can enforce. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the darkness. Your uncle has money and men. I have a crew who trusts me and motivation to prove something. Prove what? Colt didn't answer right away. The fire crackled. Cattle moved in the darkness. The wind carried smells of grass and distance. That I'm not the man who walks away anymore, he said finally. Lena studied him across the flames. Who'd you walk away from? Someone who needed help and didn't get it in time. He met her eyes. I was practical, careful, weighed the risks, and decided involvement was too dangerous. He tossed the stick into the fire. She died alone, I lived with being smart instead of decent. That's not your fault, isn't it? I made a choice. She paid for it. He stood, brushing ash from his pants. Get some sleep, Lena. Tomorrow's going to be long. This time when he left, she didn't ask any more questions, just watched him disappear into the darkness, wrapped in her blanket and her own thoughts. The night passed quiet. Too quiet, in Colt's opinion. Men like Briggs didn't give up after one conversation, and $200 bought a lot of persistence. Dawn came cold and gray, promising rain before noon. The crew moved through morning routines with new wariness, eyes checking horizons, hands staying close to weapons. They were 2 days from Cheyenne now. 2 days from completion, payment, and the end of obligations. 2 days from decisions that would determine what came next. Colt pushed the herd harder than usual, wanting distance, wanting progress. The cattle complained but moved, driven by men who understood urgency, even if they didn't know all the reasons. Lena worked in the wagon, reorganizing supplies, updating ledgers, making herself useful in ways that didn't require explaining. Colt caught her watching the trail behind them more than once, looking for riders that hadn't appeared yet. They would, though. He was sure of it. The question wasn't if Gideon's men would try something. The question was when and how ready they'd be. The rain came at noon, exactly as the sky had promised. Not the gentle kind that cooled the air and settled dust, but the punishing Wyoming kind that turned trails to mud and made every mile feel like 3. Colt pulled his hat lower and kept the herd moving, ignoring water that ran down his neck and soaked through layers of clothing that were supposed to keep him dry. Behind him, the supply wagon lurched through ruts that hadn't existed an hour ago. Jake fought the reins, cursing steadily in a tone that was almost meditative. Lena had retreated inside, but Colt could see her silhouette through the canvas, still working on something even as the wagon bucked and swayed. Stubborn woman. They were making terrible time. At this rate, they'd be lucky to cover 8 miles before dark, and that was assuming the rain let up and the trail didn't get worse. Colt did the math in his head. They'd lose a full day, maybe more, which meant arriving in Cheyenne later than contracted. Late meant penalties. Penalties meant less money. Less money meant the medicine budget Lena had worried about became even tighter. Everything connected. Everything cost. Boss! Marcus rode up, water streaming off his hat. We got a problem with the herd. They're bunching up, getting spooked by something. Colt turned his horse, scanning the cattle. Marcus was right. They were clustering together instead of spreading out, heads turning towards something Colt couldn't see yet. What spooked them? Don't know. Could be the weather. Could be... The gunshot cracked through the rain. Colt's hand went to his revolver before his brain caught up. The cattle exploded into motion, panic spreading faster than the sound of thunder. 200 head of beef suddenly became a living stampede, running blind through rain and mud. Scatter, Colt shouted, though half the crew was already moving. Get clear of the herd. Let them run it out. Riley's horse went down in the mud, throwing him hard. Colt saw him roll, saw hooves missing him by inches, saw Marcus reach down and haul him up behind his saddle without slowing. The cattle ran south, away from the trail, toward rougher country that would make rounding them up a nightmare. But alive was better than trampled, so Colt let them go and focused on the real problem. Someone had fired that shot deliberately. Someone had stampeded his herd on purpose. Jake! Colt wheeled his horse toward the supply wagon. Get that wagon off the trail, now! Jake was already moving, driving the horses toward a cluster of rocks that offered some cover. The wagon hit a rut and tilted hard, canvas tearing on an overhanging branch, supplies crashing inside. Colt reached the wagon as Lena tumbled out the back, clutching her notebook and looking dazed. You hit? He demanded. No, what's happening? Someone's making a point. Colt dismounted, using his horse as a shield. Get behind those rocks. Stay low. Colt, move! She moved, scrambling over wet stone with Jake's help, while Colt scanned the ridgeline where the shot had come from. Nothing visible through the rain, but that didn't mean they weren't there. Marcus and Riley joined them, both men breathing hard, both checking weapons automatically. How many cattle we lose? Colt asked. Won't know until we round them up. But that's going to take hours, maybe all night. Marcus wiped rain from his face. This wasn't random, boss. That shot was timed perfect to scatter the herd without hitting anyone. I know. Colt checked his revolver, then looked at each of his men. Briggs is making it expensive to keep Lena, showing us what it costs. You think he'll try again? Riley asked. I think he's just getting started. Colt turned to where Lena crouched behind the rocks, hair plastered to her head, eyes wide but steady. This is your chance to walk away. You tell Briggs where you are, this stops. You go back to your uncle, we round up the herd and move on. Lena's jaw tightened. That what you want? What I want doesn't matter. What you choose does. For a long moment, she just looked at him through the rain. Then she stood, water running down her dress, hands clenched into fists. I'm not going back. Not to Gideon. Not to that life. Her voice shook but didn't break. If Briggs wants me, he can come take me himself. I'm done running. You realize what you're saying? I'm saying I'd rather die out here than go back to being someone's tool. She met his eyes without flinching. I'm saying if you're willing to stand with me, I'm willing to fight. Colt looked at his crew. You boys signed up for cattle driving, not this. Anyone wants out, now's the time. Nobody moved. Marcus spoke first. Hell, boss. We already lost half a day and a scattered herd. Might as well see it through. Riley nodded. Plus I got thrown off my horse. That's personal now. Even Jake, who usually stayed neutral, grunted agreement. Been on boring drives. This one's at least interesting. Despite everything, Colt felt something loosen in his chest. Not quite relief, but close enough. All right then. He turned back toward the ridge line, raising his voice to carry through the rain. Briggs, I know you can hear me. You want Lena Voss. You come down here and talk face to face like a man instead of taking pot shots from cover. Silence. Just rain and wind and the distant sound of scattered cattle. Then movement on the ridge. Two figures on horseback, descending slowly through the mud. Briggs and Reeves, just like before. But this time they weren't pretending to be friendly. They stopped 50 feet away, close enough for conversation, far enough to be safe. Briggs sat easy in his saddle despite the rain, like this was just another day's work. Mr. Maddox, he called. Seems we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. You stampeded my herd. I'd say that's more than wrong foot territory. Just demonstrating the situation. See, Mr. Hale is a patient man, but patience has limits. Briggs gestured broadly. That herd of yours? Gonna take you what? 2 days to round up? 3? Meanwhile, every hour you're delayed costs money. Late fees, spoiled cattle, lost contracts. Get to the point. The point is this gets expensive for you real fast. All over a woman who ain't even yours to protect. Briggs smiled, water running off his hat brim. Now, Mr. Hale authorized me to offer compensation for your trouble. Say $300. You hand over Miss Voss, we forget about the stampede, and you get enough money to cover your losses and then some. That's generous, Colt said. What's the catch? No catch, just business. Mr. Hale gets his niece back safe, you get paid, everyone wins. Briggs's smile didn't waver. Only other option is we keep making things difficult until you can't afford to keep her anymore. Your choice. Colt felt Lena tense beside him, felt his crew waiting for his decision, felt the weight of $300, real money, more than they'd make on the whole drive. I got a counteroffer, he said. Briggs raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. You ride back to Gideon Hale and tell him Lena Voss doesn't want to be found. Tell him she's under the protection of people who don't take kindly to threats. Tell him if he sends anyone else after her, they won't ride back to deliver the message. The smile finally left Briggs's face. You're making a mistake. Probably. I make a lot of them. Colt's hand rested on his revolver, casual but clear. But this one's mine to make. Briggs looked past Colt to where Lena stood. Miss Voss, you hearing this? This man's about to make your problems into his problems. That what you want? Lena stepped forward before Colt could stop her. What I want is for you to tell my uncle that I'm not coming back. Not today. Not ever. He can keep his money and his threats and his control. I'm done. Your uncle's going to be disappointed. He'll survive. Her voice gained strength. And you can tell him something else. Tell him I kept copies of his real ledgers, the ones showing where the stolen goods came from, where they went, Who got paid? I mailed them to a lawyer in Denver with instructions to send them to the territorial marshal if anything happens to me. It was a bluff. Had to be. But Briggs didn't know that, and uncertainty flickered across his features. You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Voss. No, I'm done playing. Lena stood taller despite the rain, despite her soaked dress and pale face. This is me choosing what happens next. Now get off this trail before my friends decide you're worth the ammunition. Briggs studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at Colt, at the armed men behind him, at the determination in faces that hadn't been there days ago. Mr. Hale won't like this, he said finally. Mr. Hale's a long way from here, Colt replied, and we got work to do. Briggs touched his hat brim in a gesture that might have been respect or mockery. See you in Cheyenne, Mr. Maddox, count on it. They rode away slowly, not hurrying, making it clear they weren't retreating out of fear, just calculating new odds, planning next moves. When they were gone, Riley let out a breath. That was close. That was stupid, Marcus corrected. We just made enemies of people with resources and motivation. We already had those enemies the minute we didn't sell Lena out the first time. Colt turned to his crew. Now we got two jobs. First, round up that scattered herd before we lose them to ravines or rustlers. Second, get to Cheyenne alive and collect what we're owed. In that order? Jake asked. Simultaneously, if we can manage it. Colt looked at the muddy trail, the rain that showed no signs of stopping, the problems that kept multiplying. Split up. Marcus, you and Riley start working the cattle back. Jake, check the wagon for damage. I'll help with the wagon, Lena interrupted. I can sort supplies while Jake repairs. Colt wanted to argue, wanted to tell her to rest while the men worked, but he saw the set of her jaw and knew she needed this. Needed to be useful, needed to prove she was worth the trouble. Fine. But you work inside the wagon where there's some shelter. Last thing we need is you getting sicker. She nodded and moved toward the wagon without another word. The afternoon disappeared into hard work made harder by mud and rain. Marcus and Riley spent hours chasing down scattered cattle, finding them in gullies and behind rocks, driving them back toward the trail one small group at a time. Colt rode wide circles, checking perimeter, watching for signs that Briggs might try something else. By the time darkness forced them to stop, they'd recovered maybe 3/4 of the herd. The rest were either lost for good or hiding somewhere they'd find in the morning. Camp that night was miserable. Everything was wet. The fires struggled to catch and produced more smoke than heat. Men sat huddled in whatever shelter they could find, eating cold beans and bread that had turned soggy hours ago. Colt found Lena in the wagon, organizing supplies by lamplight. She'd changed into Jake's spare shirt and a pair of too big pants, her dress hanging on a line to dry. The outfit looked ridiculous on her, but at least it was dry. You should eat, he said. Already did. Riley brought me something earlier. She made another note in her ledger. We lost about 40 pounds of dried goods in the wagon tilt. The flour sacks got torn. I salvaged what I could, but we're definitely going to be tight on supplies. Add it to the list. Colt climbed into the wagon, sitting across from her. That thing you said to Briggs about keeping copies of Gideon's ledgers. That true? Lena didn't look up from her work. No. Figured, but it was a good bluff. Was it? Because now if something happens to me, Gideon won't have any reason to keep me alive. Colt hadn't thought about that angle. You think he would have? Kept you alive, I mean. I think he needs me under control. Dead, I'm useless to him. Alive and talking to authorities, I'm dangerous. She finally met his eyes. But if he thinks I already spilled everything to a lawyer, then I'm just a liability he can eliminate. So you traded one kind of danger for another. I traded being hunted forever for being hunted right now. Lena set down her pencil. Seemed like a fair exchange. Colt studied her face in the lamplight, exhaustion around her eyes, determination in the set of her mouth. She looked older than when he'd found her in the dirt, worn down by days of hard travel and constant fear. But she also looked stronger, like something had solidified inside her. You did good today, he said, standing up to Briggs, telling your truth. I had good backup. She gestured vaguely toward the rest of camp. Your crew could have sold me out at any point. The money would have been easier. They chose hard instead. That's what decent people do. Is it? Because in my experience, most people choose easy, choose safe, choose whatever keeps them comfortable. She pulled the oversized shirt tighter around herself. You're different. Your crew's different. I'm trying to understand why. Colt thought about that. About Jake and Marcus and Riley and all the men who'd signed on for cattle drives and ended up in something more complicated. We're not saints, he said finally. We're just people who've been on the wrong end of things enough times to recognize it in someone else. And that's enough? Shared experience? Sometimes. Other times it's just knowing that doing the right thing is the only way you can live with yourself afterward. He stood, preparing to leave. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be another long day. Colt? He paused at the wagon opening. Thank you for not taking the easy way. He wanted to say it wasn't about her, that he'd have done the same for anyone, but that felt like a lie, and he told enough of those in his life. Get some rest, Lena. He dropped back into the rain, leaving her alone with her ledgers and her thoughts. The night passed slowly. Colt took double watches, trusting no one else with the responsibility. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every sound could be Briggs coming back with reinforcements. But the night stayed quiet except for rain and wind and the restless movement of tired cattle. Dawn came gray and cold, the rain finally stopping but leaving everything soaked and miserable. The crew moved like old men, stiff and aching from a night spent on wet ground. How many cattle we still missing? Colt asked Marcus over morning coffee. 38 head by my count. Could be more scattered in the hills, but we're not going to find them without wasting days we don't have. 38 cattle lost meant significant money gone. Money that was supposed to pay the crew, cover expenses, maybe leave something over for next season. We move on, Colt decided. Can't afford to chase strays when we're already behind schedule. Boss, that's close to $2,000 in lost stock. I can count, Marcus. Colt's voice came out sharper than intended. He softened it. We cut our losses and get what we have to Cheyenne. Hopefully the buyer's feeling generous about the delay. And if he's not, then we negotiate. Or we take what he offers and swallow the difference. Colt tossed out his coffee dregs. Either way, we're moving out in 20 minutes. Pass the word. They made better time with the rain stopped, but the trail was a muddy disaster that slowed the wagon and exhausted the horses. Lena spent most of the morning walking beside the wagon, claiming she needed to stretch her legs, but really just trying to lighten the load. Colt noticed but didn't comment. Pride had its place, even when it was impractical. By afternoon, they crested a rise that gave them their first view of Cheyenne in the distance. The town sprawled across the prairie like something that had grown organically rather than being planned. Buildings in various states of completion, streets that followed convenience rather than design. The railroad tracks cutting through the middle like a steel river. Civilization, Riley said, almost reverent. Never thought I'd be so happy to see it. Don't get comfortable yet, Jake warned. Still gotta deliver these cattle and collect payment. And avoid Briggs, Marcus added. Don't forget about him. Nobody had forgotten about Briggs. He'd been the shadow hanging over every mile for the past 2 days. They made camp early, just outside the town limits where they could rest the cattle before the final push to the stockyards. Colt sent Riley into town to notify the buyer they'd arrived and to scout locations for potential trouble. He came back an hour later looking worried. Buyer's not happy about the delay, Riley reported. Says the market's changed since we started, price dropped. He's offering 20% less than contracted. 20%? Jake's voice rose. That's highway robbery. That's business when you're late and desperate. Riley looked at Colt. He knows we can't afford to take the cattle anywhere else. It's accept his price or eat the total loss. Colt did the math quickly. 20% less on an already reduced herd meant they'd barely break even. The crew would get paid, but there'd be nothing left over. No profit, no cushion for next season. What about Briggs? He asked. Saw him at the Grand Hotel, exactly where he said he'd be. Had 3 other men with him, all armed. Riley hesitated. Colt, they're not hiding. They want us to know they're there. Pressure, Marcus said. Make us nervous. Make us think twice about keeping Lena. Too late for that. Colt stood, decision made. Tomorrow we deliver the cattle and collect what we can. Tonight, we make sure Lena stays safe. Double watch again. Nobody moves alone. If Briggs wants to try something, he'll have to go through all of us." The crew dispersed to their tasks, leaving Colt standing at the edge of camp staring at the distant lights of Cheyenne. Somewhere in those buildings, Gideon Hale's men were planning their next move. Somewhere in that town, his financial future was being negotiated away by a buyer who knew he had all the leverage. And somewhere behind him, Lena Voss was organizing supplies in a wagon, trying to make herself useful even as the world closed in around all of them. "You're thinking too loud," Jake said, appearing beside him with coffee. "I can hear your brain working from the fire, trying to find the angle, the way through this that doesn't cost us everything." "Might not be one." Jake sipped his coffee. "Sometimes you just take your losses and move on." "And Lena? We just hand her over to cut our losses?" "Didn't say that, but you gotta face reality, Colt. We're broke, tired, and outnumbered. Buyers screwing us on price. Briggs has men and resources. At some point, being noble turns into being stupid." Colt knew Jake was right. The smart play was obvious. Take the reduced payment, give Lena some money for a fresh start somewhere else, walk away before things got worse. The smart play. The same kind of thinking that had left a woman dying in Abilene 3 years ago. "I'm not walking away," he said quietly. "Even if it bankrupts you?" "Even then." Jake sighed, long and tired. "All right, then we better get creative because stubborn alone won't pay the bills." They stood together in silence, two men watching night fall over a town full of problems they didn't have solutions for yet. Behind them, Lena emerged from the wagon, wrapped in Jake's coat, carrying her ledger like it was treasure. She saw them standing there and started to retreat, giving them privacy. "Lena," Colt called, "come here." She approached cautiously, ledger clutched to her chest. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting. I got a question." Colt turned to face her fully. "Those books you kept for Gideon. You said you were good at finding patterns, finding problems. Can you find opportunities?" "What kind of opportunities?" "The kind where we turn a bad situation profitable. The kind where we take what we got and make it worth more than what the buyer's offering." He gestured at her ledger. "You know numbers, you know trading. If you were trying to maximize value on a late cattle delivery with reduced stock, what would you do?" Lena's eyes sharpened with interest. "Can I see your delivery contract?" Colt retrieved it from his saddlebag, handing over the worn paper that outlined terms, prices, and penalties for late delivery. Lena studied it in the firelight, lips moving as she read. Then she flipped to her ledger, comparing numbers, calculating something Colt couldn't follow. "The contract specifies payment based on head count and weight," she said slowly, "but it also includes a quality bonus for prime stock. Did you ever calculate that?" "No, never seemed worth the effort." "It might be now." Lena made more notes. "If you can prove your cattle are higher quality than average, you could claim the bonus. It's not huge, but it might offset some of the price reduction." "How do we prove quality?" "Bring in an independent assessor, someone the buyer can't bribe or intimidate. They evaluate the stock, certify the quality, and the contract says the buyer has to honor it." She looked up, eyes bright. "It's a long shot, but it's something." "Who would we get to assess?" "The railroad has livestock inspectors. They're supposed to be neutral." Lena flipped more pages. "And there's another thing. This penalty for late delivery? It's calculated per day late, but it caps at 7 days. We're only 6 days behind. If the buyer tries to charge more than that, he's violating the contract." Jake whistled low. "Girl knows her loopholes." "I know contracts," Lena corrected. "Gideon taught me to find every advantage, every technicality. I just never used it for anything good before." Well, Colt felt something shift. Not quite hope, but possibility. "So we get the cattle assessed, claim the quality bonus, and make sure the buyer only charges legitimate penalties. It won't make you rich, but it might keep you from going broke." Lena handed back the contract. "That is, if the buyer doesn't just refuse everything and dare you to take it to court." "Let me worry about the buyer." Colt folded the contract carefully. "You just gave me more leverage than I had 5 minutes ago. That's worth something." "Is it?" Lena's voice went quiet. "Because I'm the reason you're in this mess. If you'd left me in that dirt, you'd have delivered on time with full stock and none of this would be happening. If I'd left you in that dirt, I'd be the kind of man who walks away from people who need help." Colt met her eyes. Rather be broke and decent than rich and empty. That's easy to say when you're not actually broke yet. Probably. Ask me again tomorrow after I negotiate with the buyer. He smiled, tired but real. Either way, we see this through together, all of us. Lena nodded slowly, clutching her ledger like armor against the uncertainties ahead. The last night before Cheyenne passed in watchful quiet. No attacks came. No riders appeared from the darkness. Just wind and stars and the weight of tomorrow pressing down on all of them. Colt barely slept, mind running through scenarios, calculating odds, preparing arguments he'd make to a buyer who had no reason to be generous. Near dawn, he found Lena already awake, sitting by the cold fire, staring at nothing. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. Keep thinking about what happens tomorrow, about what happens after tomorrow. She pulled the coat tighter. When this is over and you've delivered the cattle and collected your money, where do I go? What do I do? Colt sat beside her, the question hanging between them like something physical. Where do you want to go? I don't know. I spent so long thinking about getting away from Gideon, I never thought about where I'd go when I was free. She laughed, bitter and quiet. Stupid, right? Fight so hard for freedom and have no idea what to do with it. Not stupid, human. Colt picked up a stick, drawing patterns in the dirt. Freedom's harder than people think. Being told what to do is simple. Choosing for yourself? That's terrifying. Is that why you keep taking trail jobs, because someone else tells you where to go? The question cut closer than she probably meant. Maybe. Or maybe I just haven't figured out what I want beyond the next paycheck. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other by accident and were trying to figure out what that meant. I could use someone good with numbers, Colt said finally. Someone who knows contracts and can keep books properly. If you wanted, you could... Don't, Lena interrupted gently. Don't offer me something out of obligation or guilt. I need to know I can make it on my own first. Need to prove I'm more than someone who needs rescuing. You already proved that. To you, maybe. Not to myself. She stood, brushing dirt from Jake's borrowed pants. But thank you for offering. It means something. Colt watched her walk back to the wagon, leaving him alone with the dawn and thoughts he couldn't quite sort. The sun rose on their last day on the trail, painting Cheyenne in shades of gold and promise that felt like lies. Somewhere in that town, decisions waited to be made. Battles waited to be fought. And whatever happened next would determine if stopping for one collapsed woman in the Wyoming dirt had been the best choice Colt Maddox ever made. Or the worst. They drove the herd into Cheyenne's stockyards at mid-morning, cattle kicking up dust that hung in the still air like a curtain. The yards were busy with other drives, other men making their own deals, other fortunes being won or lost in conversations that looked casual but carried the weight of whole seasons. Colt counted his remaining stock as they filed through the gates. 162 head. Not the 200 they'd started with, not even close to what the contract promised. The buyer was waiting near the way station, a thick man named Hutchins who wore a suit too nice for standing in cattle yards. He pulled out a pocket watch as Colt approached, making a show of checking the time. 6 days late, Hutchins said instead of greeting. Contract specified penalties for delays. Contract also specified a cap on those penalties. Colt handed him Lena's analysis, the pages she'd prepared showing exact calculations. 7 days maximum. We're within that. Hutchins barely glanced at the papers. You're also short 38 head. That affects the total value significantly. Lost them in a stampede. Acts of nature aren't covered under breach terms. Colt kept his voice level, professional. But I'm requesting a quality assessment on the stock we delivered. Premium beef should qualify for the bonus clause. That got Hutchins' attention. Quality assessment? That'll take time. Cost you money. I'll pay for the assessor. You honor the contract terms. Colt pulled out the worn document. Says right here that quality bonuses are calculated independent of quantity delivered. My cattle might be fewer, but they're worth more per head. Hutchins' eyes narrowed. Someone's been reading contracts awful careful. Someone wants what they're owed. Colt held his ground. Get your assessor. I'll wait. The assessment took 3 hours. A railroad inspector named Morrison walked through the corralled cattle, checking teeth, examining muscle tone, testing weight against frame. He took notes in a leather book, asked questions about feed and handling, nodded occasionally in a way that revealed nothing. Colt watched from outside the fence, Marcus beside him. "Think it'll work?" Marcus asked. "Don't know, but it's better than just accepting Hutchins' offer without a fight. Where's Lena?" "Wagon, staying out of sight until this is done." Colt shifted his weight, restless. "Briggs hasn't shown up yet. That worries me." "Maybe he gave up." "Men like Briggs don't give up. They just change tactics." Colt scanned the stockyard entrance, watching for trouble that could come from any direction. "Soon as we get paid, we get Lena somewhere safe. Somewhere Gideon's reach doesn't extend." "You thought about where that might be?" "Working on it." Morrison finally emerged from the cattle pen, wiping his hands on a cloth. He spoke with Hutchins for several minutes, showing him the notes, pointing at specific entries. Hutchins' face went through several expressions: skepticism, irritation, finally resignation. He walked over to where Colt waited. "Assessment confirms premium quality on about 60% of your stock," Hutchins said, grudging every word. "That qualifies for partial bonus. Combined with the late penalties, reduced quantity, and current market rates, I'm offering $4,200 for the lot." Colt did the math. $4,200 was low, but it was better than the $3,500 Hutchins had originally offered. Better than nothing. $4,500, Colt countered. "Your original price reduction was based on assumptions. The assessment proves those assumptions wrong." $4,300, final offer, take it or find another buyer." They both knew there wasn't another buyer. Not one that would pay better. Not one that would pay at all for a late delivery of reduced stock. $4,300, Colt agreed. "Cash, now." Hutchins pulled a bank draft from his coat. "I'll have the funds transferred to, Cash, Colt repeated. "No drafts, no transfers, bills in my hand before those cattle are yours." Something flickered in Hutchins' expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition of someone who'd been cheated by paper promises before. "That's a lot of cash to carry in this town." "I'll manage. Get the money." An hour later, Colt walked out of the stockyard office with $4,300 in a leather satchel, the weight of it both reassuring and terrifying. This was everything: crew wages, expenses, the tiny margin that might let him take another contract instead of finding work in a factory somewhere. Jake was waiting with the wagon, Lena hidden inside like they'd planned. Marcus and Riley flanked him, hands near weapons, eyes scanning for threats. "We good?" Jake asked quietly. "We're paid. Not good, but paid." Colt climbed onto his horse, keeping the satchel close. "Let's get to the bank before something happens to change that." They moved through Cheyenne streets in a tight formation, wagon in the center, riders surrounding it. People stared at the armed group, but nobody interfered. In a town built on cattle and conflict, armed men guarding money was common enough not to draw questions. The bank was 2 blocks from the stockyards, a solid brick building that promised security. Colt dismounted, taking the satchel with him. "Wait here," he told the crew. "Anyone approaches, you shout." Inside, the bank was cool and quiet, smelling of paper and metal, and the particular mustiness of money-changing hands. Colt approached the teller, a thin man with spectacles who looked at the satchel with professional interest. "Need to deposit this and make some withdrawals for crew wages," Colt said. "Of course. May I see the funds?" Colt opened the satchel, showing stacks of bills bound with paper strips. The teller's eyes widened slightly. Not shocked, but calculating. "This is quite a sum. Will you be maintaining an account with us?" "Just long enough to pay my people and settle debts." Colt pulled out Lena's accounting of crew wages. "Here's the breakdown. Needed in smaller bills for distribution." The teller took the paper, examining the neat columns of numbers. "This is very precise work." "I got someone good with numbers." "I can see that." The teller began counting bills, creating stacks for each crew member. "Will you be staying in Cheyenne long?" "Depends." "On what?" "On whether trouble finds me before I can leave." The teller's hands paused briefly, then continued counting. "I see. Well, for what it's worth, this bank has strong doors and armed security. If you needed a safe place to conclude business, you could do worse." Colt studied the man's face, looking for angle or agenda. Found nothing but practical sympathy. Appreciate that. The counting took 20 minutes. By the end, Colt had separate envelopes for each crew member, wages earned, promised bonuses, a little extra for the trouble. What remained barely covered operating costs and left almost nothing for himself. But his people would be paid. That mattered. Outside, the crew waited with growing tension. Colt handed out envelopes, watching faces light up as men counted money they'd earned through mud and stampedes and choices that had cost them all. "This is more than we agreed," Riley said, staring at his bills. "You earned more than we agreed, did extra work, dealt with extra problems." Colt looked at each of them. "You could have walked away when things got complicated. You didn't. That's worth something." Marcus pocketed his envelope without counting it. "What about you, boss? You take your share?" "I'll manage." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." Colt swung back onto his horse. "You boys are released from contract. You want to stay in Cheyenne, find other work, head home. That's your business now. Just make sure you spend that money somewhere safe." They dispersed slowly, some heading for saloons, others toward boarding houses, all of them carrying the satisfied weight of wages earned hard. Only Jake remained with the wagon. "Where to now?" he asked. "Need to talk to Lena, figure out what comes next." Jake nodded toward the wagon. "She's been awful quiet. Think she heard the money talk." Colt climbed into the wagon, finding Lena sitting among the remaining supplies, her ledger closed in her lap. She'd changed back into her own dress, now cleaned and mended as well as possible, trying to look presentable for whatever came next. "We got $4,300, Colt said without preamble. "Paid the crew, covered debts. Got about $300 left. That's not much. It's enough to get you somewhere safe. Buy you time to figure out what's next." He pulled out a smaller envelope, bills he'd counted carefully. "Here, $200. Fresh start money." Lena stared at the envelope like it might bite her. "I can't take that." "Why not?" "Because you need it. Because you've already lost money protecting me. Because—" She stopped, frustrated. "Because I don't take charity." "It's not charity. It's payment for services rendered. You fixed my books, found theft, saved me from worse losses than what we took." Colt pushed the envelope closer. "You earned this, Lena, same as the crew." She took it slowly, hands trembling slightly. "What happens now?" "Now you decide. You can stay in Cheyenne, find work, start over where Gideon might not look. Or you can take that money and go somewhere else. Denver, San Francisco, anywhere that's not here." "What do you think I should do?" Colt wanted to tell her to stay, wanted to say he'd find work here, that they could figure something out together. But that was his wanting talking, not what was best for her. "I think you should go somewhere you can be yourself without looking over your shoulder. Somewhere far enough that Gideon's reach don't extend." He met her eyes. "I think you should be safe, Lena, even if that means being somewhere I'm not." She looked at him for a long moment, something complicated passing across her features. "You're giving me permission to leave." "I'm giving you choice, real choice, not just picking between bad options." Colt stood, preparing to give her privacy. "Whatever you decide, I'll help you get there. But the decision's yours." He climbed out of the wagon, leaving her alone with $200 and possibilities that had seemed impossible just days ago. Jake was checking the horses, pretending not to be curious. "She taking the money?" "Yeah." "She leaving?" "Don't know yet." "What do you want her to do?" Colt didn't answer. Couldn't, really. What he wanted was tangled up with what was right, and those two things didn't always point the same direction. They were still standing there when Riley came running back from town, breathing hard. "Colt, Briggs is here, at the Grand Hotel. He's got Gideon Hale with him." Every muscle in Colt's body tensed. Gideon came himself? Saw him through the window. Big man, expensive suit. Had to be him. Riley bent over, catching his breath. They got at least 6 armed men with them, maybe more inside. "Did they see you?" "Don't think so. I was careful." Colt's mind raced through options. Gideon coming in person changed everything. This wasn't just hired men following orders anymore. This was personal. This was a man who'd spent money and pride on finding someone who'd embarrassed him by running. "We need to move," Jake said. "Get Lena out of town before they find us." Where? They'll have people watching the roads, the train station. Anywhere obvious, they'll be waiting. So we go somewhere not obvious. Colt turned to Riley. The railroad inspector, Morrison. Where's he staying? Probably the workman's hotel by the depot. Why? Because he's neutral. Railroad employee, no connection to Gideon, no reason to take sides. Colt made a decision. Find him. Tell him I need a favor, and I'll pay for it. Tell him it's about protecting someone from people who don't respect contracts. Riley nodded and took off running again. Colt turned to the wagon. Lena, come out here. She emerged slowly, the envelope of money clutched in one hand, her face pale but composed. I heard. Gideon's here. Yeah, which means we're out of time for slow decisions. Colt looked at her directly. I'm getting you out of Cheyenne. Tonight. But I need to know if you're willing to fight back. Fight back how? Gideon's power comes from secrets and control. He kept you scared because he convinced you that you were complicit in his crimes, that you'd go down if he did. Colt pulled out the contract from his saddlebag. But what if you weren't the one going down? What if you were the witness instead of the criminal? Understanding dawned in Lena's eyes. You want me to testify. I want you to have the option. Talk to the territorial marshal, tell them what you know, trade information for protection. He held up a hand before she could object. I'm not saying you have to. I'm saying it's leverage. Gideon can't touch you if touching you means federal charges. He'll deny everything. It's his word against mine. Unless you got proof. Colt watched her face carefully. You said you kept Gideon's books for 6 years. You telling me you don't remember details, numbers, transactions that could be verified? Lena's fingers tightened on the money envelope. I remember everything. Every stolen shipment, every bribed official, every dollar that moved through his company illegally. Then you got power, Lena. You just never used it. Because using it means putting a target on my back forever. You already got that target. At least this way you got protection too. Colt stepped closer, voice urgent. I can't fight Gideon with money or men, but I can get you to people who can. People whose job is taking down men like him. You willing to let me try? She looked at the envelope in her hand, at the wagon that had been her shelter, at the man who'd stopped for her when stopping made no sense. If I do this, she said slowly, there's no going back. Gideon will know I betrayed him. He already knows you ran. This just makes you too dangerous to touch, or too dangerous to leave alive. That's why you get protection first, why you don't make a move until you're somewhere safe with people who can keep you that way. Colt held her gaze. I won't lie to you, Lena. This is risky. Maybe more risky than just running. But running means always looking over your shoulder. This means maybe you get to stop running. Lena was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with a decision that would reshape everything. Then she straightened her shoulders. All right, I'll do it. I'll talk to the marshal. She met his eyes. But Colt, if this goes wrong, if Gideon gets to me before the law can help, he won't. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll do everything possible to make sure it doesn't happen. Colt turned as Riley came running back. Morrison, the railroad inspector, following at a more dignified pace. Morrison was a lean man in his 50s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades around livestock and hard decisions. He took in the scene, armed men, a hidden woman, obvious tension, and nodded like he'd expected something like this. Riley says you need help, Morrison said, and that it involves people not respecting contracts. That true? True enough. Got a woman here who's being hunted by her former employer. Man named Gideon Hale staying at the Grand Hotel with armed men. Colt gestured to Lena. She's got information that could put Hale away, but she needs to get to the territorial marshal's office without being intercepted. Morrison studied Lena with the same careful attention he'd given the cattle. She willing to testify? I am, Lena said, voice steady despite obvious fear. I kept Gideon Hale's books for 6 years. I know where the money came from, where it went, who got paid. I can prove he's been running stolen goods and bribing officials throughout the territory. That's serious charges. It's all true. Morrison was quiet a moment, considering. Then he pulled out his watch, checking the time with the same deliberate precision he'd shown during the assessment. Train leaves for Denver at 8 tonight. I'm on it, heading to regional headquarters for my report. He looked at Lena. Railroad employees get private compartments. Enough room for two if one person doesn't mind tight quarters. You'd help her? Colt asked. I'm helping Justice. Happens to benefit her too. Morson's expression was unreadable. I got no love for men who think money puts them above the law. If Miss Voss can prove Hale's crimes, then getting her to people who can act on that information seems like the right thing to do. Gideon's men will be watching the station, Lena said. They'll be watching for a woman traveling alone. They won't be watching for a railroad inspector bringing his assistant to file reports in Denver. Morrison looked her up and down. You got any other clothes besides that dress? Just what I'm wearing. We'll fix that. Riley, go buy men's work clothes. Shirt, pants, coat, hat. Plain stuff that won't draw attention. He pulled out money. Get something that fits loose enough to hide her shape. Riley took the money and disappeared again, moving fast. Morrison turned to Colt. You trust this crew of yours? With my life. Good. Because here's how this works. At 7:30, you create a distraction. Something that draws attention away from the depot. Nothing illegal, just loud and visible. While everyone's watching that, Miss Voss and I board the train like we've done it 100 times before. And in Denver? I take her directly to the territorial marshal's office. Explain the situation. Let her tell her story to people with authority to act on it. Morrison met Lena's eyes. That work for you? It works, thank you. Don't thank me yet. We gotta survive the next few hours first. Morrison checked his watch again. Meet me at the depot at 7:15. Side entrance, not the main platform. Come alone and come dressed like you're ready to work, not travel. He walked away without waiting for response, already moving on to the next task with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. Colt turned to Jake. You heard him. We need a distraction at 7:30. What kind of distraction? The kind that's memorable but not destructive. Something Gideon's men can't ignore but that doesn't get us arrested. Colt thought fast. Marcus still in town? Saw him heading for the saloon. Find him. Tell him we need his help one more time. Tell him it pays $100. Jake's eyebrows rose. You got $100 to spare? No, but I got $100 of debt I'm willing to take on if it keeps Lena safe. Riley returned with a bundle of clothes, simple work pants, a rough cotton shirt, a coat that had seen better days, and a flat-brimmed hat. Lena took them into the wagon to change, emerging 5 minutes later looking like a young ranch hand who'd spent too many days in the sun. The transformation was startling. Dressed in men's clothes, hair tucked under the hat, dirt smudged on her face to hide her features, she could pass for a worker easy enough. Not perfect, but good enough in twilight and confusion. How do I look? She asked. Like someone Gideon's men won't look at twice, Colt said. That's exactly right. She smiled, nervous but determined. So we do this. We really do this. We really do this. Colt checked his revolver, more habit than necessity. But Lena, once you're on that train, you don't get off until Denver. Don't change your mind halfway. Don't try to come back if you get scared. You commit to this path and you follow it through. Clear? Clear. The hours until 7:15 stretched like taffy, time moving too slow and too fast simultaneously. Colt went over the plan again and again, looking for holes, finding new ones each time. Jake assembled a distraction involving Marcus, Riley, and what appeared to be a very drunk argument about cattle prices that would spill into the street at exactly 7:30. It was stupid, obvious, exactly the kind of scene that drew attention. Perfect. At 7 o'clock, Colt walked with Lena toward the depot, taking back streets and alleys, avoiding main thoroughfares where Gideon's men might be watching. She walked like a man who'd spent the day working, tired shuffle, shoulders slightly hunched, no trace of the woman who'd organized ledgers with precise efficiency. Morrison was waiting at the side entrance, exactly as promised. He looked at Lena, nodded approval at the disguise, and gestured them inside. Train's already boarding. We go straight to the second-class compartment, third car from the engine. Don't talk to anyone. Don't make eye contact. Just follow my lead. He looked at Colt. Your distraction better be good. It'll be memorable. That's what worries me. Morrison pulled out tickets. You got 60 seconds to say whatever you need to say. Then we're getting on that train with or without proper goodbyes. Colt turned to Lena, suddenly aware this might be the last time he saw her. That she was boarding a train toward a future he wouldn't be part of. When you get to Denver, he started, then stopped. What could he say that would matter? What words would carry weight against everything she was about to face? Lena saved him from struggling. Thank you for stopping, for everything. You did the hard part. I just gave you space to do it. That's not... She stopped, frustrated. Colt, I don't know how to say this, but you changed something. In me. Made me think I could be worth more than what Gideon told me I was. You always were worth more. You just needed to believe it. 30 seconds, Morrison said quietly. Lena pulled the envelope of money from her pocket. Take this back. Use it for your next contract. Start over somewhere. That's your money. I'll get by. I always have. She pressed it into his hand. Besides, I'm going to need you solvent if I'm going to hire you someday. Hire me for what? I don't know yet, but I'll think of something. She smiled, sad and hopeful at once. If I survive this, if I get through testifying and Gideon goes down and I'm actually free, maybe I'll need a trail boss who knows how to stop for people. Before Colt could respond, she stepped forward and kissed him. Quick and awkward and completely unexpected, her lips dry against his, the gesture carrying more meaning than words could. Then she pulled back, face red. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have... Time, Morrison interrupted, not unkindly. Lena turned and followed the inspector toward the waiting train, not looking back, moving with purpose toward whatever came next. Colt stood frozen for a moment, her kiss still burning on his lips, the envelope of money heavy in his hand. Then the sound of shouting erupted from the main street. Marcus and Riley's staged argument going exactly as planned, drawing attention and crowds and Gideon's men toward the commotion. The train whistle blew, passengers hurried aboard. Morrison and Lena disappeared into the second-class car, just another inspector and his assistant heading to file boring reports. Colt watched from the shadows as the train pulled away, carrying her toward safety or danger or some combination of both. Watched until the lights disappeared around the bend, taking with them the woman he'd found collapsed in the dirt and leaving him with questions he couldn't answer. He walked back to the main street where Jake was restraining a still shouting Marcus, while Riley explained to a deputy that it was just drunk talk and no harm meant. The crowd was dispersing, the show over, people returning to their evening business. She get on? Jake asked quietly. She got on. Good. Jake released Marcus, who immediately stopped his performance. What now? Colt looked at the money Lena had returned. $200 he'd tried to give her, now pressed back into his keeping. Combined with what he had left, it was enough. Enough to take another contract, enough to start over, enough to wonder what the hell he was supposed to do next. Now we wait, he said finally. See if she makes it to Denver. See if the marshal believes her. See if any of this was worth it. And if it wasn't, then at least we tried. Colt pocketed the money. That's more than I could say before. They headed back toward the stockyards where the wagon waited, Cheyenne settling into evening around them. Somewhere in this town, Gideon Hale was discovering his quarry had escaped. Somewhere on the rails heading east, Lena Voss was carrying secrets that could topple a man who thought himself untouchable. And somewhere in the space between, Colt Maddox was learning that the hardest part of choosing to stop wasn't the stopping itself. It was the letting go that came after. 3 days passed like holding breath underwater, necessary but unsustainable, waiting for either air or drowning. Colt stayed in Cheyenne, taking a room at a boarding house that charged by the week and smelled like old tobacco and regret. The money Lena had returned sat in his saddlebag, untouched, like spending it would somehow betray the gesture. He checked the telegraph office twice daily, waiting for word from Denver that never came. Jake found him there on the fourth morning, standing outside the telegraph office for the third time that day. You know watching that door won't make news come faster, Jake said. I know. You also know she might not send word. Might be safer not to, depending on what's happening with the marshal. I know that too. Colt turned away from the office, restless energy needing somewhere to go. Doesn't make the waiting easier. Nothing does. That's why it's called waiting. Jake fell into step beside him. Got a line on a contract. Smaller outfit heading to Montana. They need experienced hands. Pay's not great, but it's steady. You taking it? Thinking about it. Wanted to know your plans first. Colt didn't have plans. Had nothing but questions and the memory of a kiss that had tasted like desperation and hope. I'm staying until I know she's safe, he said finally. And if that takes weeks, months, then it takes what it takes. Jake was quiet a moment. You got feelings for her. It wasn't a question, but Colt answered anyway. Don't know what I got, just know leaving before I know she's all right feels wrong. Fair enough. Jake pulled out tobacco, rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. But Colt, you can't save everyone. Sometimes people gotta save themselves. She is saving herself. I'm just making sure she gets the chance to finish. That what you're calling it? Before Colt could answer, Riley came running up the street waving a piece of paper. Colt, telegraph came. From Denver. Colt's heart stopped, then started again too fast. He took the paper with hands that wanted to shake, reading words that had traveled across wires to find him. Hale arrested. Stop charges filed. Stop testimony. Secured. Stop. Protected. Witness status granted. Stop. LV. Safe. Stop. Short. Efficient. Exactly what Lena would send if she could only afford essential words. She was safe. Gideon was arrested. The gamble had paid off. Good news? Riley asked. Best kind. Colt handed him the telegram. She did it. Actually did it. Jake read over Riley's shoulder, a rare smile crossing his weathered face. Well, I'll be damned. Girl's got spine after all. Always had it. Just needed reason to use it. Colt felt something unclench in his chest, tension he'd been carrying since watching that train disappear into darkness. Riley, go find Marcus. Tell him drinks are on me tonight. We're celebrating. What about you? Jake asked after Riley left. What happens now? Colt stopped. Now what? Lena was safe. His obligation was fulfilled. He could take that Montana contract, head north, return to the life of moving cattle and never staying anywhere long enough for complications. Could. The word felt hollow. I need to think, he said instead. That night, Colt sat in his boarding house room, the telegram spread on the small table, reading the same words over and over like they'd reveal something new. Protected witness status meant Lena would testify, meant Gideon's trial would drag through courts for months, meant she'd be stuck in Denver, probably, supervised and safe, but not free. Not yet. A knock interrupted his thinking. Jake stood in the hallway, 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey in hand. Figured you'd be up here overthinking, Jake said, inviting himself in. Thought you could use company. I'm fine. Liar. Jake poured 2 generous drinks, handing one to Colt. You're trying to figure out if you should go to Denver. That obvious? To someone who's known you 15 years? Yeah. Jake settled into the room's only chair. So let's talk it through. What's stopping you? She didn't ask me to come. She also didn't ask you to stop for her in the dirt, but you did anyway. Jake sipped his whiskey. Sometimes people don't ask because they don't think they deserve to, or because they're trying to stand on their own. Like she said, she needs to prove she can make it without being rescued. There's a difference between rescuing someone and standing with them. You know that, right? Colt stared at his untouched drink. What if I go there and she doesn't want me? What if I'm just the guy who happened to stop at the right time? Nothing more? Then you'll know. You'll have an answer instead of spending years wondering. Jake leaned forward. Colt, I watched you die a little when that woman in Abilene passed. Watched you carry that weight ever since, punishing yourself for choosing practical over right. You got a second chance here. Don't waste it being afraid. I'm not afraid. Bull. You're terrified. Terrified she'll say no. Terrified she'll say yes, and you'll have to figure out what comes after. Jake stood, heading for the door. But you know what's more terrifying? Living the rest of your life asking what if. He left the bottle and his wisdom, closing the door quietly behind him. Colt sat alone with both, the whiskey burning his throat, Jake's words burning deeper. Morning came with decision made. Not carefully reasoned, just inevitable. Colt packed his few belongings, settled his account at the boarding house, and checked the train schedule. Next departure for Denver was noon. He found Jake at the stockyards, already negotiating terms for the Montana contract. "I'm going to Denver," Colt said without preamble. Jake didn't look surprised. "Figured you might. What about contracts?" "You take the Montana job. You'll do fine without me." "And you? What happens if you get to Denver and it doesn't work out how you're hoping?" "Then I find work there. Or I come back, or I go somewhere else entirely." Colt pulled out money, counting bills. "This is your pay for the extra work. Hazard compensation for dealing with Gideon's men." Jake looked at the money but didn't take it. "Keep it. You're going to need it more than me." "Jake, I said keep it. Consider it an investment in you figuring out what the hell you want beyond the next cattle drive." Jake finally met his eyes. "You've been running as long as I've known you, Colt. Maybe it's time to try standing still. See what happens when you actually plant roots somewhere." "I don't know how to do that." "Nobody does until they try." Jake gripped his shoulder briefly. "Go. Find out if she's what you think she is. Find out if you're brave enough to choose something besides the trail." The train to Denver left on time, carrying Colt and his uncertainty east across plains that looked different, heading away from Wyoming. Less familiar, more like stepping into unknown territory. He spent the journey trying to plan what he'd say when he saw her. Practiced conversations in his head, rejected them all as either too desperate or too casual. By the time Denver's buildings appeared on the horizon, he'd given up on planning and decided to just be honest. Terrifying prospect, honesty. The territorial marshal's office was easy to find, solid stone building near the Capitol, guards posted outside. Colt approached the desk sergeant, a bored-looking man shuffling papers. "Help you?" the sergeant asked without looking up. "I'm looking for Lena Voss. She's a protected witness here. Testified against Gideon Hale." That got the sergeant's attention. He studied Colt carefully. "You have business with Miss Voss?" "Personal business." "That's not specific enough. Protected witnesses don't get random visitors." Colt pulled out the telegram. "She sent me this. I came to make sure she's all right." The sergeant read it, suspicion not quite fading. "Wait here." 20 minutes passed, long enough for Colt to question every choice that had brought him to this desk, long enough to consider leaving before making a fool of himself. Then Morrison appeared from a back hallway, the railroad inspector looking official and slightly out of place in a law enforcement building. "Maddox," Morrison said, "didn't expect to see you here." "Didn't expect to come. How is she?" "Surviving. Testimony was hard. 4 days of questions, lawyers trying to trip her up, Hale's people glaring from the gallery, but she held firm." Morrison gestured toward the hallway. "She's in a safe house nearby, under guard until the trial concludes. Can't tell you where exactly, but I can ask if she wants to see you." "I'd appreciate that." Morrison disappeared again, leaving Colt standing in a government hallway feeling increasingly out of place. His trail clothes were dusty from travel, his boots scuffed, everything about him screaming transient worker in a building full of permanent fixtures. 15 minutes later, Morrison returned with a woman Colt barely recognized. Lena wore a simple day dress, her hair properly arranged instead of hidden under a hat, her face clean of the dirt that had disguised her features. She looked healthier than she had on the trail, color in her cheeks, weight coming back, eyes less haunted. She also looked uncertain, like she couldn't quite believe he was standing there. "Colt," she said quietly. "What are you doing here?" A dozen practiced answers died in his throat. "Making sure you're all right." "I sent a telegram, said I was safe." "I know, but I needed to see it for myself." He felt awkward, exposed, every word revealing more than he intended. "Wanted to make sure you didn't need anything." "I'm fine. The marshal's office is taking good care of me. Morrison's been checking in regularly. I have everything I need." She paused. "You didn't have to come all this way just to check on me." "Maybe I wanted to." That hung between them. Honesty without pretense, admitting motivation he'd been avoiding examining too closely. "Can we talk?" Lena asked. Somewhere not in a government hallway? Morrison glanced at the desk sergeant, who nodded reluctantly. 30 minutes. In the courtyard. You stay where the guards can see you. The courtyard was small, surrounded by high walls, more functional than beautiful, but it had benches and something approaching privacy. Lena sat, gesturing for Colt to join her. How long can you stay in Denver? She asked. Don't know. Haven't thought that far ahead. That's not like you. You always think ahead. Usually, but this isn't usual. Colt looked at her directly. Lena, I came here because I needed to know if what happened on the trail meant something, or if it was just proximity and crisis making things feel bigger than they were. And if it was just crisis, then I'll know. I'll head back to Wyoming, take another contract, move on. He took a breath. But if it wasn't, if you felt something too, then I'd like to know what comes next. Lena was quiet for a long moment, hands folded in her lap, eyes on the ground. When she spoke, her voice was careful. I'm going to be here for months, Colt. Maybe longer, depending on Gideon's trial and appeals. I'm under protection, which means restrictions on where I can go, who I can see. I can't leave Denver without permission. Can't make plans beyond tomorrow because everything depends on court schedules. She finally looked at him. That's not a life I can ask someone to wait around for. You're not asking, I'm offering. Why? We knew each other for less than 2 weeks. Most of that time I was either unconscious or scared or hiding. You don't know me, Colt. Not really. I know you're smart enough to organize chaos into something useful. I know you're brave enough to stand up to people who tried to control you. I know you risked everything for a chance at being free. He shifted closer. And I know that kiss before you got on the train wasn't just goodbye. Color rose in Lena's cheeks. I was terrified and grateful, and you were the only person who'd shown me kindness in years. That's not the same as what? Caring about someone? Because I'm pretty sure I do. Care about you, I mean. The words came out awkward but true. I'm not good at this, Lena. Not good at talking about feelings or making pretty speeches. But I'm good at showing up. Good at staying when things get hard. And if you need someone to stay while you get through this trial, while you figure out what free actually means, then I'm volunteering. Lena's eyes were bright with something that looked like tears. You'd stay in Denver for months? Just waiting around for me to be available? I'd find work, take contracts nearby, build a life that could include you when the trial's done. He paused. Unless you don't want that. Unless I'm reading this completely wrong and you'd rather I go back to Wyoming and leave you alone. I don't want you to go. The admission came out quiet but firm. I kept hoping you'd come. Kept checking with Morrison to see if you'd sent messages, but I was afraid to ask because I didn't know if what I was feeling was real or just leftover crisis emotion. Exactly. She laughed, short and nervous. We're a mess, aren't we? Probably. But we're a mess that survived a stampede, outsmarted a criminal, and got you to safety against significant odds. Colt reached for her hand, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Seems like we work all right when things get complicated. And when things get simple? Then we figure that out together. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not promising perfect, Lena. I'm just promising I'll try. That I'll stay. That I won't walk away when it gets hard. She looked at their joined hands, tears finally spilling over. That's more than anyone's ever promised me. Then your life's been too full of the wrong people. They sat together in the courtyard, holding hands and building something fragile that might become stronger given time. Morrison appeared at the doorway after exactly 30 minutes, tactful enough to cough before interrupting. Time's up, he said, though I suspect Maddox will be back tomorrow. If Lena wants, Colt said. I want, she confirmed, not letting go of his hand yet. Where will you stay? I'll find a boarding house, somewhere close to the Capitol so I can visit between court sessions. He stood, reluctant to leave but knowing he had to. I'll come back tomorrow, and the day after, however long it takes. Colt? Thank you for coming, for staying. She pulled him down, kissing him properly this time. Not desperate goodbye, but tentative hello, tasting of possibility instead of fear. Morrison cleared his throat again, louder. They broke apart, both slightly embarrassed, both smiling in ways that suggested embarrassment didn't much matter. Colt left the marshal's office and walked into Denver's streets with purpose he hadn't felt in years. The money in his saddlebag would cover a room for a few weeks. After that, he'd need work. He spent the afternoon making inquiries, stockyards, freight companies, anyone who needed someone good with cattle and logistics. By evening, he'd lined up 3 potential contracts, all local, all flexible enough to work around court schedules. Not ideal, but workable. Exactly what he needed. He found a boarding house 2 blocks from the Capitol, clean enough, cheap enough, run by a widow who didn't ask questions about why a trail boss wanted to stay in the city. The room was small, but the window overlooked the street where Lena would pass if she ever got permission to leave the safe house. He sat by that window the first night, watching Denver settle into darkness, thinking about choices and consequences, and the strange way life sometimes gave second chances to people who'd failed the first test. Days turned into weeks. Colt visited Lena daily when court wasn't in session, their conversations growing easier, less guarded. She told him about her testimony, how Gideon had watched her from the defendant's table, face expressionless, while she recited details of his crimes from memory, how his lawyers had tried to paint her as a willing participant, and how she'd calmly presented documentation that proved otherwise. Morrison had helped, apparently, brought forward railroad records that corroborated Lena's accounts of stolen shipments. Other witnesses had come forward too, emboldened by her willingness to testify. "They're saying Gideon might get 15 years, Lena told Colt one afternoon in the courtyard. "Maybe more if all the charges stick." "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved, guilty, scared." She pulled her shawl tighter despite the warm day. "He controlled my life for so long that part of me still can't believe he's actually going to face consequences." "He is. You made sure of it. We made sure of it. If you hadn't gotten me here, if Morrison hadn't protected me, if—" She stopped. "I couldn't have done this alone." "You weren't alone. That's the point." Colt took her hand, a gesture that had become natural over weeks of visits. "You're never going to be alone again, Lena. Not if I have anything to say about it." She leaned against his shoulder, trusting in ways she hadn't allowed herself before. "I'm starting to believe that." The trial concluded 6 weeks after Colt arrived in Denver. The jury deliberated for 2 days, then returned with guilty verdicts on 17 of 19 charges. Gideon Hale was sentenced to 18 years in territorial prison with no possibility of early release. Lena cried when she heard the verdict. Not from joy exactly, more like release. Like something heavy she'd been carrying finally lifted. Colt held her in the courtyard while she shook, letting her process everything in her own time. "What happens now?" she asked when the tears stopped. "Now you're free. Actually free. Protected witness status ends. You can go anywhere, do anything." He pulled back to see her face. "What do you want?" "I don't know. I've spent so long surviving that I never thought about what I'd do if I won." She wiped her eyes. "That sounds stupid." "Sounds human." Colt tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You don't have to decide everything today. Take time. Figure out who you are when you're not running from someone." "And you? What do you want?" Colt had been thinking about that question for weeks. Had answers he'd been afraid to speak out loud. "I want to stop moving," he said finally. "Want to find a place and build something that lasts longer than a season. Maybe take on smaller contracts, local work. Something that lets me stay in one place." He paused. "With you, if you'll have me." Lena studied his face, searching for doubt or obligation. Finding neither, she smiled, real and full and completely her own. "I'll have you. But, Colt, I need to do something first." "What's that?" "I need to find work that's mine, something I choose because I'm good at it, not because I'm dependent on it." Her voice strengthened. "The marshal's office said they need someone to organize their financial records. Years of poor accounting. I think I could fix it." "You could fix it better than anyone." "I know, and I want to try. Want to use what I learned from Gideon for something legitimate. Something that proves I'm more than his bookkeeper who got away." Pride swelled in Colt's chest. "When do you start?" "Next week, if I want it. They're offering actual salary, benefits. It's not much, but it's stable." She looked at him nervously. "Would that be all right if I took it?" "Lena, you don't need my permission to work. You don't need anyone's permission anymore." "I know, but I'm asking anyway, because what I do affects us, and I want to make sure we're building this together. Together, Colt agreed. Which means I should probably tell you I've been looking at property north of Denver. Small place. Land for grazing, enough room for a decent operation. Not trail driving, more like supply and logistics for cattle companies. Using the skills I got, but staying local. That sounds expensive. It is, but I've got savings, and the work I've been doing paid better than expected. With both of us earning, we could maybe make it work. He hesitated. If you wanted to. If that's something you'd be interested in. Lena was quiet, considering. A partnership. Real partnership. Both of us working, both of us building. Exactly that. No rescuing, no owing, just two people choosing to build something together. I like that. She stood, pulling him up with her. Show me this property. They rode out the next day, Lena on a rented horse, Colt leading the way to land he'd been scouting for weeks. 40 acres of decent grazing, a creek running through the southern edge, a small house that needed work but had good bones. It's not much, Colt said, suddenly seeing all the flaws through her eyes. Needs repairs, fence is falling apart, the house hasn't been lived in for a while. But the land's good and the price is fair and… It's perfect, Lena interrupted, walking through grass that came up to her knees. Or it will be, with work. Our work. You sure? Because we don't have to decide today. We can keep looking, find something better. She kissed him quiet, right there in the middle of overgrown pasture land, the afternoon sun making everything golden. I'm sure, she said when they broke apart. I choose this. I choose us. I choose building something that lasts. They bought the property a week later, using Colt's savings and a small loan the bank granted based on his work history. Lena started at the marshal's office the same week, diving into financial chaos with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found her calling. Repairs on the house took months. They lived in a boarding house while Colt rebuilt the fence and fixed the roof and made the place livable. Lena helped on weekends, learning to hammer nails and mix mortar, building calluses that matched her capabilities. Local cattle companies started hiring Colt for short contracts, moving small herds, evaluating stock, organizing sales. Nothing grand but steady, enough to make payments on the land and slowly build a reputation. 1 year after finding Lena collapsed in the Wyoming dirt, Colt stood in the doorway of their house, fully repaired now, painted and furnished with pieces they'd collected slowly, and watched her work at the table they'd built together. She was organizing accounts for a freight company, neat columns of numbers that told stories only she could fully read. Her ledger had multiplied into several, her work so valued that people sought her out specifically. What? She asked, noticing his stare. Just thinking about how different things are now. Better different or worse different? Better. Definitely better. He crossed to her, kissing the top of her head. You happy, Lena? She set down her pencil, turning to face him properly. You know what? I actually am. For the first time in my life, I'm doing work I chose, living somewhere I want to be, with someone who sees me as an equal. She stood, wrapping her arms around his waist. That's more than happy. That's free. Good. Because I was thinking maybe we make this official. Official how? Colt pulled out a simple gold band, nothing fancy but solid and real. Marry me. Build this life together properly. Make it permanent. Lena looked at the ring, then at him, eyes bright. That's not very romantic. I know, I'm not good at romantic, but I'm good at honest. And honestly, I can't imagine doing this with anyone else, can't imagine wanting to. That's more romantic than you think. She held out her hand, letting him slide the ring on. It fit perfectly. He'd measured carefully, planning this for weeks. Yes. I'll marry you. Build this life with you. Make it permanent. They married quietly 3 months later, Morrison serving as witness, Jake traveling from Montana for the occasion. No big ceremony, no elaborate celebration. Just two people making promises in front of a justice of the peace, choosing each other deliberately. The cattle business grew slowly but steadily. Colt built a reputation for fair dealing and quality work. Lena's accounting practice expanded beyond the marshal's office, serving multiple clients who valued precision and honesty. 5 years after that first meeting in the Wyoming dirt, They stood together on their land, watching the sun set over pastures where healthy cattle grazed, over fences Colt had built with his own hands, over a home they'd created from nothing but decision and work. "You ever regret it?" Lena asked. "Stopping for me that day? All the complications that came after?" Colt thought about the question seriously. About the money lost, the risks taken, the comfortable life he'd left behind for something uncertain. "No," he said finally. "Best decision I ever made. Changed everything." "For better or worse?" "For better. Always for better." He pulled her close, both of them watching darkness settle over land that belonged to them. "You know what I learned from all of it?" "What?" "That strength isn't about moving on. It's about knowing when to stop, when to plant roots, when to choose standing still over running." He kissed her temple. "You taught me that. I think we taught each other." Lena leaned into him, solid and sure. "I learned I was worth fighting for. You learned you were worth staying for. That's not a bad exchange." They stood together as night fell, two people who'd found each other by accident and built something deliberate from that chance encounter. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the hardest choice, the one that makes no practical sense, turns out to be the one that saves you. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. In the house behind them, ledgers waited for tomorrow's work. In the space between, Colt and Lena Maddox held each other and understood that what they'd built wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, chosen, fought for, earned through every difficult decision and uncomfortable conversation and moment when walking away would have been easier than staying. And in the end, that made it stronger than anything perfect could ever be. The Wyoming wind still blew across the prairie, still howled and pushed and tried to move everything in its path. But some things refused to move. Some things planted deep roots and held firm against whatever came. Some things, and some people, learned that the greatest strength wasn't survival. It was choosing what to survive for, and building a life worth the choosing.